Easter certainly seems an appropriate time to pay our respects to the men of all creeds who are the spiritual and often the temporal advisors of our friends and dear ones in the Army of the United States. We are honored at the privilege of presenting for the first time the official march of the Chaplain Corps of the United States Army, Soldiers of God.
Welcome to Chaplain Stories, sacred stories from the front lines of ministry. My name is Chaplain Caleb McCary, and we are going to be talking to chaplains about their stories, living out their calling and ministering to military personnel. I'm so glad to have you joining us as we talk about faith, life, and ministry with our guests. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this special episode of Chaplain Stories. It has been about 14 months, maybe a little more, since I started the podcast, just kind of as an idea, as our division chaplain in the 3rd Infantry Division at the time was preparing to retire. And I thought about him and his service and kind of the time that his service spanned, and I thought, you know what? It would be sad if he retired and nobody ever got a chance to hear his stories. Because his service spanned a time frame in our history as a chaplain corps, going back to just before the start of September 11th, all the way through those years of Afghanistan and Iraq, and on into the current environment that the military is operating in now. And so that's kind of what got that idea started. That was Chaplain Bill Killow, one of the early interviews that I did for the podcast, which you can find on SoundCloud or iTunes. And, you know, over the last year, I have got to hear some amazing stories from some amazing chaplains, and I hope that it has been a blessing to you. And one of my desires as the podcast has gone on is to continue to learn and to grow and to get better at this podcasting thing. So you'll notice that I'm shooting a video right now, and I am holding a microphone, which is one of the more recent additions to my podcast. So if you're just listening to it on your iPhone or on the go in your car, I'm actually sitting here in front of my camera with a microphone and a recording device sitting on my lap right now. So this is my effort to continue to improve the quality of the podcast and to make it so that these are things that you want to share with your friends, share with your family, tell the story of our chaplains to people out there, because a lot of the times you'll read the headlines, you'll read the stories, you'll read the history, and you'll know that somewhere in there is a chaplain doing work, but very rarely do you hear their stories. And this is my effort to try and tell their stories. So I've got my microphone, I've got a recording device, which I used for the very first time on my last podcast with Chaplain Brad Hanna, but I have not had the opportunity to use a podcast using this microphone. So I am pretty excited about getting to record a podcast with this microphone setup. I've got 2 microphones, one for me and one for the person I'm interviewing, and that will help, hopefully, cutting down some of the ambient noise in some of the environments where I'm going, and make the quality of the podcast that much better than it has been in the past. Because I started out just recording these, and in fact have recorded most of them to this point on my iPhone using a small external microphone, usually just sitting on the table in front of us. So I'm hoping to continue to improve the quality and make this something that can really shine and give chaplains a great forum to tell their stories. Now, one of the things about all of this is my I guess you could call it a hobby, a labor of love, whatever you want to call it. One of the ways that if you are interested in helping to support the continued creation of this podcast, you can find Chaplain Stories on Patreon. Patreon is a website where creators of content can post things, and then people in the community can back those projects, back the creation of those projects. And so if you enjoy this content, if this is something that you think is beneficial, it would mean a lot to me if you would check out Patreon. And one of the things that I'm going to be aiming to do, I won't be able to do it all the time because of the environments where I record and limitations there, but one of the things that I hope to start doing is recording some of my interviews with video, not just audio. And then backers on Patreon will get the very first access to those video podcasts, and maybe periodically other things like this where I record some special informational things or behind-the-scenes things for the podcast. So Chaplain Stories on Patreon, I usually post a link to that in the descriptions of the podcast as well, so if you look at it on your phone or on your computer, you should be able to find a link there as well. And if you would check that out and maybe consider backing the creation of the podcast so I can continue to work on developing the skills needed to create and edit the content, and as well keeping the equipment that I use to record the podcast on the cutting edge and up to date. And if you haven't already, please share the podcast with your friends and family. iTunes, SoundCloud, it's on Google Play. You can even find it on TuneIn. So there's a lot of different places where you can find the podcast. So anything where you listen to audio, a phone, a computer, your car, chances are you're going to be able to find some way to listen to the podcast. So if you can check it out, share it with your friends and family. When a new episode comes out, if you can post the links to your social media feeds and spread the word to continue to share with our community about the great work that our chaplains are doing with our soldiers and military personnel. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen, and I will look forward to visiting with you and hearing from you next time as we do another Chaplain Story.
Easter certainly seems an appropriate time to pay our respects to the men of all creeds who are the spiritual and often the temporal advisors of our friends and dear ones in the Army of the United States. We are honored at the privilege of presenting for the first time the official march of the Chaplain Corps of the United States Army, Soldiers of God.
Welcome to Chaplain Stories, sacred stories from the front lines of ministry. My name is Chaplain Caleb McCary, and we are going to be talking to chaplains about their stories, living out their calling and ministering to military personnel. I'm so glad to have you joining us as we talk about faith, life, and ministry with our guests.